Assalamu alaikum everyone. I hope all of you are doing well. So in this video, I will be discussing about Thomas Stearns Eliot and his literary criticism. So let's start. So T.S. Eliot was born in St. Louis, Missouri, America in 1888 of a transplanted New England family of Unitarian faith and Puritan inclination. He studied at the Smith Academy in St. Louis and published his first poetry in the Smith Academy record in 1905. His early reading include notably the Rubaiyat of Umar Khayyam and the poetry of D.G. Rossetti and Byron. The Byronic influence remained with him for 20 years. He received an undergraduate degree from Harvard University, where he had constructed his attention on philosophy and logic. His major work include Tradition and Individual Talent. Now, what is in the essay of Tradition and Individual Talent? The essay Tradition and the Individual Talent was first published in The Egoist 1919 and later in The Sacred Wood in 1920. This is one of the most influential essays of Eliot, and it is with this that his critical career effectively begins. The originality of this essay, according to George Watson, lies not in its anti-liberalism but in its application of this fashionable doctrine to the immediate critical situation. It is an unofficial manifesto of Eliot's criticism, or an account of the principles the young critic planned to bring to bear upon English poetry. Now it is further divided into three parts. The first part named as Tradition, and it is further divided into many paragraphs, which is named as the first three paragraphs named as A New Conception of Tradition. Now in these paragraphs he talk about that in English writing the critic very seldom speak of tradition. Seldom does the word appear except in a phrase of censure. Every nation, every race has not only its own creative but its own critical turn of mind, and is more oblivious of the shortcomings and limitation of its critical habits than of those of its creative genius. The English, says Eliot, are pleased to attribute critical faculties to the French. They are proud to call themselves more creative, but criticism is as inevitable as breathing. One of the facts that might come to light in this process, criticism, is our tendency to insist, when we praise a poet, upon those aspects of his poetry or work in which he least resembles anyone else. In these aspects or part of his work, we pretend to find what is individual, what is peculiar essence of the man. This is a sort of prejudice. If we approach a poet without this, we shall often find that only the best, but the most individual parts of his work may be those in which the dead poets, his ancestor, asserts their morality most vigorously. So according to Eliot, tradition is a matter of much wider significance. It cannot be inherited, and if you want it, you must obtain it by great labor. Tradition involves the historical sense, and the historical sense involves a perception, not only of the pastness of the past, but of its presence. The historical sense compels a man to write not merely with his own generation in his bone, but with a feeling that the whole of the literature of Europe from Homer, and within it the whole of the literature of its own country, has a simultaneous existence and composes a simultaneous order. So in the second paragraph from 4 to 5, it is named as Necessity of Tradition. As we all know about what is tradition, and it is a historical sense, now we move towards that necessity of tradition. So according to Eliot, the historical sense is what makes a writer more acutely conscious of his place in time, of his own contemporary or contemporaneity. No poet, no artist of any art has its complete meaning alone. His significance, his appreciation is the appreciation of his relation to the dead poets and artists. You cannot value him alone. You must set him for contrast and comparison among the dead. Eliot explains that this is not merely historical criticism, it is also aesthetic criticism. The existing work of art from an ideal order among themselves, when a new work of art is introduced, the ideal order is modified, and so the relation, proportions, value of each work of art towards the whole are readjusted, and This is conformity between the old and the new. So the third point is the relation of the poet to the past. It consists of 6 to 8 paragraphs. It is from the 6 to 8 paragraph, and Eliot proceed to more intelligible exposition of the relation of poet to the past. The poet can neither take the past as a lump, as indiscriminate mass, nor can he form himself wholly on one or two private admiration, nor can he form himself wholly upon one preferred period. The first course is inadmissible, the second is an important experience of youth, and the third is a pleasant and highly desirable supplement. The poet must be very conscious of the main current and aware of the obvious fact that art never improves, and that the material of art is never quite the same. The mind of courses changes, but this change is a development of which abundance nothing on the way, which does not superannuate either Shakespeare or Homer. This development is not, from the point of view of the artist and that of psychologist, any improvement of the relationship of the past and the present. Eliot's view is that, but the difference between the present and the past is that the conscious present is an awareness of the past in a way and to an extent which the past awareness of itself cannot show. So in the second part of this essay, named as Personality and the Poetic Expressions, in this he talk about poet's personality. In this part, Eliot takes up the theme at which he ended part 1, depersonalization and poetic expression. Basically discusses the relationship of the poem to its author. To explain his idea of the function of personality in a poetic process, he gives an example from chemistry. The analogy is that of a catalyst. A catalyst is a substance which alters the rate at which a chemical reaction occurs, but is itself unchanged at the end of the reaction. When oxygen and sulfur dioxide are mixed in the presence of filament of platinum, they form sulfuric or sulfurous acid. This combination takes place only if the platinum is present, and the platinum itself is apparently unaffected, has remained inert, neutral and unchanged. The personality of the poet is in the same manner is a medium in which special or very varied feeling are at liberty to enter into a new combination. The mind of the poet is the shirt of platinum. It may partly or exclusively operate upon the experience of the man himself, but the more perfect the artist, the more completely separate in him will be the man who suffers, and the mind who creates, the more perfectly will the mind digest and transmute the passions which are its material. So the mind or the personality of the poet is the transforming catalyst, and the element which enters the presence of this catalyst are of two kinds, emotions and feeling. Eliot concludes the analogy by saying the poet's mind is in fact a receptacle for seizing and storing up numberless feeling, phrases, images which remain there until all the particles which can unite to form a new compound are present together. So in the second part of this part 2, he discussed about poetry and escape from emotions. According to Eliot, the poet has not a personality to express, but a particular medium, which is only a medium and not a personality, in which impression and experience combine in peculiar and unexpected way. Impressions and experience which are important for the man may take no place in the poetry, and those which become important in the poetry may play quite a negligible part in the man, the personality. It is not his personal emotion, the emotion provoked by particular events in his life, then that the poet is in any way remarkable or interesting. His particular emotion may be simple or crude or flat. The emotion in his poetry will be a very complex thing, but not with the complexity of emotions of people who have complexity or unusual emotions in life. The business of the poet is not to find new emotion, but to use the ordinary ones, and in working them up into poetry to express feelings which are not in actual emotions at all. Eliot calls Wordsworth's formula, emotions recollected in tranquility, is an exact formula for him. Poetry is a concentration and a new thing resulting from a concentration of a very great number of experiences, which to the practical and active person would not seem to be experiences at all. It is a concentration which does not happen consciously or of deliberation. These experiences are not recollected and they finally united in an atmosphere which is tranquil only in that it is passive, attending upon the events. Now the third part is basically the conclusion part. This part begins with the quotation from Aristotle's On the Soul, which means the mind is doubtless something more divine and unimpressionable. Eliot confines himself to such practical conclusions as can be applied by the responsible person interested in poetry. His aim is to deliver interest from the poet to the poetry, because it would conduce to a juster estimation of actual poetry, good and bad. People's attitude to poetry be of three kinds. Many appreciate the expression of sincere emotion in words. A small number can appreciate technical excellence, but very few know when there is an expression of significant emotion which has its life in the poem and not in the history of the poet. Eliot concludes the essay in these words: the emotion of art is impersonal, and the poet cannot reach this impersonality without surrendering himself wholly to the work to be done, and he is not likely to know what is to be done unless he lives in what is not merely the present, but the present moment of the past, unless he is conscious not of what is dead, but of what is already living. So that's all from my side. If you have any queries, you can ask me in the comment section. Please like, subscribe and share my channel. Thank you for watching.